Neil Lazarus here, and welcome to another podcast. In today's podcast, we will be looking at the violence between Israel and Hamas in Gaza, the worst violence we've seen in over 4 years. This is Neil Lazarus from awesomeseminars.com, and welcome to another podcast. I hope you enjoy this. It's going to be really intense because politics in the Middle East right now is remarkably on tenterhooks to see what and how the situation with Gaza develops. Just to backtrack a second, as I'm sure most of you know, last Friday an Israeli soldier was wounded by shrapnel from a grenade that was thrown at him on the northern Gaza Strip. The grenade was thrown whilst violence had broken out with thousands of Palestinians on the border. I remind you that this has been taking place every Friday since probably around May the 14th. On May the 14th, when the embassy of the United States was opened in Jerusalem, we had 40,000 people trying to cross the border in 5 different places. And ever since then, Hamas has encouraged the masses to come across. What we saw was, in response to this hand grenade attack, Israel responds citing and aiming at Palestinians' buildings. Remember, it's not because of the grenade was, if you like, the straw that broke the camel's back in many ways. The real story is the story of incendiary kites, bombs, which have been flying over the border. Hamas has changed. Hamas has changed its tactics. In 2001, 2002, there were suicide bombing attacks. There were the Sbarro. There was bomb after bomb. And we've discussed that before in other podcasts. They've moved from suicide attacks, which were basically stopped by higher intelligence, by the wall being built, by checkpoints, etc. They moved to development of long-range rockets, and we saw fired at as far afield as Haifa 4 years ago. That has been also reduced. The effectiveness has been reduced because of the development of the Iron Dome, although the use of mortar shell is actually much more difficult for Israel to stop because the amount of time you have to react is much shorter. Even the tunnels today, which have been used to smuggle in weapons and smuggle out fighters to attack Israel, have also been thwarted to a greater degree. Egypt has been flooding tunnels. Israel has developed the technology to detect these tunnels and to destroy them from the air without even committing a ground troop. So Hamas moved from those tactics to, one, encouraging people to come across the border, and at the same time to also use incendiary kites. It sounds crazy. If you've seen them, you know what I'm talking about. Literally kites attached to Molotov cocktails. Sorry about that. Molotov cocktails. And at the same time, not only Molotov cocktails, you've not only got kites, you've also got condoms. Yeah, you had me right. Inflated condoms with Molotov cocktails at the bottom of them, and also balloons coming over. Now, it sounds crazy, but the reality is these things are as effective as your Casa Missa. We've had over 7,500 acres of land at the moment destroyed, agricultural land. It's worth millions of shekels worth of damage. And the pressure has been growing by people in the south. It's like, look, we're losing our livelihood, we're losing our business. And last Saturday, Israel decided to respond finally and change the rules of the game. We saw over 50 sites in Gaza of Hamas being targeted. These sites were actually qualitative sites. And again, to get into a little bit more depth, as I try to with these podcasts, often when you have, something coming across from Gaza, Israel will retaliate. But it's a game of fireworks. In other words, it's tit for tat, but we'll take out an outpost, we'll take out a observer post. But it's not really doing damage. Saturday was different. Saturday we targeted, for example, the training base, which was a multi-story building in Gaza, under which there was a network of tunnels coming into Israel. So some serious qualitative sites. Also in daylight, which again, I think was a message to Hamas that this was very, very serious. In return, on Saturday, Hamas fired scores of rockets at Israel, and in particular they were using, Israel used 40 of the rockets of the Iron Dome to counter them. We average in Israel at around 20 to 25 fires a day before this Saturday, which is crazy. For those of you listening in California, I don't need to probably tell you about fires. We still have every Friday violence coming and people being encouraged to come across the border. And as a response to Israel's targeting of Hamas, we saw this Saturday over 200 rockets fired by Hamas at Israel. Those are rockets and mortar shells. It really was quite incredible to watch. It was literally minute after minute after minute. We had some hours where the red siren, the code red siren, was just blaring continuously. People's phones were ringing. And like I said, it was a day which we haven't seen that level of violence since 2014. The Egyptians, together with the United Nations, helped broker a ceasefire, which is now in place. Israel's made it very clear now that if there are any balloons, any kites which are fired at Israel, Israel will respond as if it was a missile. And so I think the rules of the game have changed. In the last 48 hours, we saw yesterday about 3 balloons coming, or 3 sets of kites and balloons coming over. Israel responded immediately, targeting the people who were launching them. And today, so far, we have had nothing coming over. Maybe, just maybe, Hamas is getting the message. What is clear is the next few days are very tense. We're going to see which way it goes. I think perhaps one indication is that the Iron Dome, Israel's anti-ballistic system, was moved also to cover the area of Gush Dan in Tel Aviv, which is perhaps a sign of how serious Israel can consider the situation getting. The problem, though, is what to do. In Israel, there's an expression called mowing the lawn. It's a terrible expression, which basically refers to this idea of knocking down Hamas, putting them back in their place, and then 4 years later the problem will return. And we've done that before. I'm not sure whether the time has come for a strategic changing thought. Look, the easiest thing is for Israel to launch another war. The question is, what's next? On one hand, Israel could retake the Gaza Strip. In fact, this weekend we saw exercises in the Israeli army which simulated the taking of Gaza City, in case that wasn't a serious enough hint for the Palestinians. But no one's rushing to do that. There is the plan to cut Gaza in 3, prevent free movement from north to south, Israel acting, but then you're basically becoming sitting ducks for an eternity. It's not a solution. It's a bit like what happened in the South Lebanon security zone. And that, by the end of it, we saw the development of Hezbollah. The trouble and the real truth is that if you destroy Hamas, the question, what replaces it? Israel? I'm not sure that's an option. 2, there have been calls for putting in the Palestinian Authority back in Gaza, giving them the strength, and getting rid of Hamas. But anyone who's put in Gaza by Israel will be seen as puppets, collaborators, a bit like the South Lebanese army. So the reality is, what next? There's been other ideas that Israel's floated, which is to create an artificial island off of Gaza, which would have a port and an airport. That was considered a little expensive. On the other hand, we've also seen Cyprus, Greek Cyprus, offer to create a port in Cyprus, which could be used by the Palestinians in Gaza. That was rejected by Hamas. But perhaps the real reluctance for Israel not to go into a war in Gaza is really that all eyes are on the north. We've seen in the last week non-manned aircraft, drones coming across from Syria, even at the time when Netanyahu was talking to the Russians. There's reports again of an Israeli attack in Syria against Iranian interests there. And I think the reluctance in Israel is to open a two-front war. That is seen as very problematic. The reality is, if you look carefully at what's happening in the north of Israel, slowly but surely, the war between Israel and Iran is being fought. And it's being fought in Syria. The rules of the game: fight a war in other people's countries and using other people's troops. At the moment, we don't have Israeli troops committed, or at least not openly. The question is, how can you stop the Iranians from coming to the border? Netanyahu met Putin recently. And again, it's worth stressing, and I've mentioned this before in other podcasts, the Iranians and the Russians are not necessarily on the same side. They have different interests in Syria. The Iranians would like to take it over to use it as a front against Israel. The Russians want stability. Israel's made it very clear to Russia that it will not tolerate Iran taking over Syria. At a bottom line, Israel would not allow Iranian troops to sit on the northern border. We have evidence that the Iranian troops are now dressing up as Syrian troops. Hezbollah is also acting as and dressing up as Syrian troops. They're changing uniforms on us, which becomes even more complicated. But I come back and I keep saying, as the war in Syria develops, it's the northern border which is causing us the most problems. We're on the eve of the meeting between Putin and Trump in Helsinki. Let's see what develops there as far as Syria is concerned. Trump, Mr. Unpredictable, it would be foolish for us to try and guess what comes out of it. What we did see was him upset half of NATO for threatening to leave NATO. And he even shook the Queen's hand in the UK, which is unheard of. So let's see what happens. We'll report back in another podcast very soon. If you want to contact me, if you've got questions, you can send me an email on awesomeseminars2001@gmail.com, or you can tweet me at awesomeseminars. I'm now also on Snapchat with Awesome Seminars, so we can snap. But drop me a line, and especially if you listen to these podcasts, say, hi, I'm a listener of your podcast, and that always gives priority in answering. Until next time, this was a short update on the situation in Gaza, and I'll keep you posted. Until then, until next time, thank you.
You're listening to Middle East expert and keynote speaker Neil Lazarus, live from Jerusalem.